She was already late. The rain had been falling for 40 minutes straight, and Amara had pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders, moving fast through the dark roadside, head down, just trying to get home. Her feet were soaked. Her phone battery was at 3%. It had been one of those days, the kind that grinds a person down to the bone, and all she wanted was her bed. That was when she heard it. A low sound. Not the rain. Not the wind. Something between a groan and a breath, barely audible, but just loud enough to make her stop. She stood still for a moment, telling herself it was nothing. An animal. The trees. Her tired mind playing tricks. But then she heard it again. She turned. There, half hidden in the shallow ditch beside the road, was a man. He was face down in the mud, one arm stretched out, fingers curled loosely. His white shirt was torn at the shoulder, soaked dark with something that wasn't rainwater. He wasn't moving. Amara felt the breath leave her body. She looked around desperately. The road was empty. No cars. No lights. No one. Just her, the rain, and this man, this stranger, lying completely still in the mud like he'd been thrown there and forgotten. "Hello?" she called out, her voice smaller than she intended. "Can you hear me?" Nothing. She took one step forward, then stopped, then took another. She knelt beside him, her hands hovering over his body, afraid to touch. Hey, wake up." She pressed 2 fingers to his neck the way she'd once seen in a movie, and felt it. A pulse. Faint. Unsteady. But there. He was alive. And she was alone on a dark road in the middle of nowhere with a bleeding stranger, 3% battery, and no idea what she was walking into. This is the story of what she did next, and what it cost her, and what it gave her back. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click the subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. We put out stories like this every week, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. Amara had grown up in a small town 2 hours outside the city. Her mother died when she was 11. A quick illness that didn't give anyone time to prepare. Her father did his best for 3 more years before his heart gave out too, quietly, in his sleep, like he'd simply decided he'd had enough of a world without her mother in it. After that, Amara raised herself, worked after school, took loans she was still paying back, became a community health worker at 24. Not because it paid well, which it certainly did not, but because somewhere in all that loss, she had decided that if the world wasn't going to show up for her, she was at least going to show up for someone else. People who knew Amara said she had a gift for caring. She would give her last bus fare to a patient who needed it more. She'd stay 2 hours after her shift ended to sit with an elderly man who had no family visitors. She never asked to be thanked. She never expected anything in return. But on that night, standing in the rain beside that ditch, even Amara hesitated. Because this was different. This wasn't a patient in a clean room. This was a bleeding man on a dark road with no explanation for how he got there. And something about the scene felt wrong in a way she couldn't name. His shirt was expensive. His watch, the one peeking out from under his sleeve, caught the faint light from somewhere and glinted. His shoes, even caked in mud, had a shape that spoke of money. Men like this didn't end up in ditches by accident. But the pulse beneath her fingers was getting weaker. "Okay," she whispered, mostly to herself. "Okay." She got her arms under his shoulders and pulled. He was heavier than she expected, tall, broad, and she nearly fell twice getting him to the edge of the ditch. He groaned when she moved him, and she felt a terrible, guilty relief at the sound of it. Pain meant life. Pain meant he was still there. She had no car. Her phone died the moment she tried to call for help. The nearest hospital was 40 minutes away, and she had no way to get there. What she did have was a small house, 15 minutes walk back the way she'd come. The house she rented alone, the one with the cracked window she kept meaning to fix and the kitchen that smelled like old wood. She made a decision she would later spend weeks questioning. She took him home, Took her over an hour to get him there. He was semi-conscious by then, able to put some weight on his feet if she held him upright, mumbling things she couldn't understand, not words, just sounds. She talked to him the whole way, the way you talk to someone you're afraid might disappear if you stop. Just keep walking. I've got you. Don't stop. Stay with me. When she finally got him through her door and onto the old couch in her sitting room, she was shaking. Her arms ached. Her knees were muddy from where she'd slipped twice on the wet road. She stood over him for a moment, catching her breath, looking at his face properly for the first time. He was somewhere in his late 30s. Strong jaw, a fading bruise already forming above his left eye, a deep cut along his collarbone that had bled through his shirt and dried in a crust. He had the kind of face that looked like it was used to giving orders. Even unconscious, there was something composed about him, something that didn't quite match the state he was in. She cleaned the cut as best she could with what she had. Antiseptic, cotton wool, bandages from the small kit she kept for work. She checked his breathing every few minutes. She stayed up all night in the chair across from him, watching. By morning, she was exhausted and he was still unconscious. By the second morning, she was starting to panic. By the third day, she had begun to notice things. The watch was a brand she recognized from a magazine someone had left at the clinic. One of those aspirational magazines full of things that existed in a world completely separate from hers. That watch cost more than 6 months of her salary. His phone, which had fallen from his pocket when she'd first laid him down, was locked with a long passcode and had some kind of secondary security feature she'd never seen on a phone before. The leather of his shoes, once she'd wiped the mud away, was so fine it felt almost soft to the touch. And on the third evening, while she was eating alone at her small kitchen table with the radio on low, she heard something that made her set down her fork. A news anchor, calm and unhurried, was reading the headlines. Most of it washed over her. But then one sentence reached into her chest and closed around her heart. Authorities are continuing their search for Damien Osei, CEO of Osei Capital, who has been missing for 4 days following what sources describe as a potential attempt on his life. Osei, whose net worth is estimated at $3 billion, was last seen leaving a private function in the city. Anyone with information is asked to. Amara turned slowly toward the sitting room. She walked to the doorway and stood there. The man on her couch had his eyes open for the first time. He was looking at the ceiling, blinking slowly, like someone finding their way back from somewhere very far away. He turned his head and looked at her. They stared at each other. "Where am I?" he said. His voice was low and rough, scraped empty. She said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, quietly, "My house." Another silence. "The news," he said. "Was that?" "Yes," she said. He closed his eyes again. When he opened them, something had shifted in them. Something careful and controlled had come back online. "How long have I been here?" 3 days. He absorbed this. "You didn't call anyone." It wasn't a question. She answered it anyway. "My phone died. And by the time I could have..." She stopped. "I don't know. Something didn't feel right. I was scared." He studied her face. "What's your name?" "Amara." "Amara." He said it like he was filing it somewhere.
"I'm Damien."
"I know who you are," she said. "I just heard it on the radio." Another long pause. Outside, the rain had started again. It seemed like it was always raining these days, and the sound of it filled the quiet between them. "You should know," he said carefully, "that the people who did this to me don't know where I am right now. And if you tell anyone I'm here..." "I'm not going to tell anyone," she said. Before she fully knew she'd decided it. He blinked. "Not yet," she added. "Not until you can tell me what's going on." He talked for a long time that night, slowly at first, wincing when he moved, pausing to collect himself, and then with more urgency as the fog lifted and the full picture reassembled itself in his mind. His business partner of 8 years, a man named Roland, had been siphoning funds from the company for over 2 years. When Damien discovered it, he made the mistake of confronting Roland privately before going to the authorities. He wanted to understand first. He wanted to believe there was an explanation. Instead, Roland had arranged for 2 men to intercept Damien's car on the night of the private function. They'd run him off the road. He'd managed to get out before the car went down the embankment, crawled to the roadside, and lost consciousness. "He thought I was dead," Damien said. "By now, he probably thinks I'm still missing, which is almost as useful to him. He has access to my accounts, my signatures. He's been preparing for this for months." Amara sat across from him, her tea going cold in her hands. "And the police? Half the officers on his payroll are people I recommended him to at charity events," Damien said, with a bitterness that was almost quiet. "I introduced him to everyone. So you don't trust anyone." "I didn't say that." He looked at her directly. "You've had 3 days to call someone. You could have sold the story. You could have handed me over and gotten whatever reward they're offering. You didn't." She didn't answer. "Why?" he asked. She thought about it honestly. "I don't know. It just didn't feel like the right thing to do." Something passed across his face that she couldn't quite read. He looked down at his hands, the bandages she'd wrapped around his right palm, the careful knots she'd tied. "How much did the supplies cost you? The antiseptic, the bandages?" "It doesn't matter." "Amara." "It doesn't matter," she said again, firmly. And that was the end of it. If you're still watching up to now, type, "I'm still here" in the comments section. It means so much to us to know you're with us through this story. He stayed for 6 more days. In that time, something happened that neither of them had planned for. They talked, really talked, in the way that only happens between people who have nothing to perform for each other. He told her about growing up without money, about building his company from nothing, about the particular loneliness of success when you can no longer tell who is real. She told him about her parents, about the years after, about the patients she cared for who had no one. "You do this work for almost nothing," he said one evening. "I do it because someone has to." "That's not an answer." "Yes, it is," she said. "It's the most honest answer there is." He was quiet. Then, "I had a staff of 320 people, personal assistants, advisors, security, and not one of them would have knelt in the mud in the rain to help me." She looked at him. "You don't know that." "I do," he said, "because I know what they were paid for, and it wasn't for that." She didn't have a response to that. She just got up and took his empty cup to the kitchen, and he watched the doorway after she'd gone through it with an expression she never saw, because her back was turned. On the 9th day, the knocking started. She had just come back from work. She'd had to keep going in, because missing days meant missing pay, and she couldn't afford either. When she noticed the car parked at the end of her street, she wouldn't have thought anything of it, except that it had been there that morning too, and the morning before. And the man inside it wasn't doing anything, just sitting, watching. She walked past her door and continued to the corner, then doubled back through the rear lane and came in through the back gate. Damien was already standing when she entered. He'd seen the car through the window. "How long?" she asked. "Since yesterday morning." She sat down and pressed her hands together on the table, thinking. "They've been asking around. One of my neighbors probably mentioned something. A man staying here, lights on at odd hours. I need to make a call," he said. "One call. To someone I trust absolutely." She slid her phone across the table. He looked at it. "This could put you at risk. Making the call or giving it to you? Both." She pushed it closer to him. "Make the call." What happened next happened fast. His call was to a woman named Priya, his company's chief legal officer, someone he'd known since university, one of the few people whose loyalty he was certain of precisely because she had nothing material to gain from it. Priya had been working quietly in the background since his disappearance, building a case, gathering evidence. Waiting, she said, for him to resurface, because she'd never believed the accident story. Within 12 hours of that call, things began to move. But the men outside weren't waiting. The knock on Amara's door came at 2 in the morning. 3 hard, deliberate beats. The kind that don't pretend to be anything other than what they are. Damien grabbed her arm in the dark. "Don't answer it. They already know someone's here," she whispered back. "Don't answer it." She stood completely still in the middle of her sitting room, every nerve alive, the darkness thick around her. The knock came again, louder. Then the sound of the door handle being tested. Then, from the back of the house, a different sound. The creak of the rear gate. They were coming in from both sides. Damien moved before she could think. Crossed the room, pushed her ahead of him toward the single interior door that led to the hallway. The one with the bolt that she'd always meant to fix because it didn't quite catch unless you lifted the handle at the same time. He lifted and bolted in one motion, seamless, like he'd memorized the house. "Phone," he said. "I gave it to you." He already had it out, already dialing. She could hear movement outside the back window. Close. Her hands were shaking. From somewhere outside came a shout. Not from the men surrounding her house, but from the street. More vehicles. Then lights. Then, unmistakably, the sound of someone with authority speaking into a radio. Damien exhaled beside her. She realized she'd grabbed his arm at some point and was holding it tightly. She let go. "Priya moved faster than I expected," he said quietly. Through the window, between the slats of the blind, she watched 3 men being walked firmly to the waiting vehicles. The car that had sat at the end of her street was gone. In its place were 2 black SUVs and a police unit, the right kind of police, the ones who reported to people Roland hadn't reached. It was over. Or rather, the danger was over. Everything else was just beginning. They arrested Roland the following morning. He'd apparently continued operating from Damien's office with stunning confidence, certain that the story would resolve itself quietly. When it didn't, when his name appeared in a freezing order signed by a judge and 2 investigators showed up at his desk at 9 a.m., he looked, by all accounts, genuinely stunned. As if he had never quite believed it would come to this. Damien was back in the city within 48 hours of that night. Clean, suited, back in the rooms he'd built and the corridors he commanded. Priya stood beside him at the press conference and did most of the talking because that was what he'd asked for. He hated cameras, hated performance. Amara watched the press conference on the small television in the clinic break room, squeezed between 2 colleagues who were more interested in their lunch. She saw his face on the screen, composed, careful, and felt something she couldn't quite name. Not sadness, not relief, something quieter than either. He called her that evening. "I'd like to see you," he said. She was sitting in her kitchen, the cracked window letting in a thread of cool air. "Why?" "Because I owe you a conversation that isn't happening in the dark." She thought about refusing. She didn't fully understand why. But she said yes. He sent a car. She almost sent it back. The restaurant was the kind of place where the menus had no prices on them, which she had always understood to be its own kind of cruelty. She sat across from him and felt, for the first time in the weeks since she'd found him, completely uncertain of herself. "You look uncomfortable," he said. "I am uncomfortable." He almost smiled. It transformed his face, that composed, controlled face, into something much more human. "I'll keep this short, then. I want to do something. For you. For what you did. I didn't do it for repayment." "I know that," he said. "That's exactly why I want to do it." She looked at her hands. "Damien, there's a medical training scholarship. Full funding, 18 months, at one of the best programs in the country. I've already checked, you meet every qualification. You could become a nurse practitioner, a physician's assistant, whatever track you want. The community you serve would get you back more qualified than when you left." He paused. "I'm not offering you money, Amara. I'm offering you what you would have given yourself if the world had been fairer to you." She was quiet for a long time. The restaurant hummed softly around them. Someone laughed at a table across the room. "And if I say no?" she asked. Then I respect that completely. She looked up at him. Why a scholarship? Why not just? Because you're not a transaction, he said simply. And I didn't want you to feel like one. She had to look away then. She thought about her parents, about the years of making do, of giving before she received, of holding things together with nothing but the decision to keep going. She thought about the man bleeding in the ditch and the way she had knelt in the mud beside him because something in her, some stubborn, persistent part, simply could not walk past. She thought, maybe the world is sometimes fair. Maybe it just takes the long way around. Okay, she said finally. Yes. He nodded. Not dramatically. Not with great ceremony. Just, yes. Good. A thing settled between two people who understood each other. They ate dinner. He told her about the company's recovery. Complicated, ongoing, full of things that would take years to repair. She told him about a patient at the clinic, a 70-year-old man who had started painting for the first time in his life after a health scare, who brought her small canvases sometimes as thanks. They talked for 2 hours like people who had no performance to maintain. When the car brought her home that night, she stood outside her door in the cool air for a moment before going in. The cracked window caught the light from the street. She would get it fixed now. She had been saying so for 2 years, and now she would actually do it. She thought about something Damien had said, weeks ago, lying on her old couch in the dark, that the people who'd surrounded him had been paid to be loyal, and it hadn't been enough. And she thought about how strange it was, the things that money can't buy, not because they don't exist, but because they can only be given freely or not at all. She had given it freely that night on the road, not knowing what it was worth, not knowing who he was, not knowing what would follow. Just a woman in the rain who looked down at a stranger and decided that his life mattered. And that, as it turned out, had been exactly enough. Kindness given without expectation has a way of rewriting destiny itself. Not loudly, not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly, surely, the way water finds its way through stone. Not by force, but simply by refusing to stop. Now, the question for you, and we mean this sincerely, what would you have done? If it had been you on that road, in that rain, with that dying man and no one watching, would you have stopped? Would you have been afraid? Would you have walked past telling yourself someone else would come? There are no wrong answers, but there is something worth sitting with. Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. And if this story stayed with you, if it gave you something to think about or something to feel, please give it a like. It takes 1 second and it means everything for getting this kind of storytelling to more people who need it. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. Stories like this only reach people because of viewers like you, and we don't take that lightly. Until next time, be kind, it always has a way of coming back to you.